But first, so the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Minnesota Vikings last night by a final score of 34-28 in the first official Thursday night game of the season on Amazon Prime. Michaels, Herbstreit on the call. And I'm hearing today, watch the game straight through, obviously. I'm seeing a lot of today, hearing a lot of today through various media outlets, whether it be television, radio, print, podcasts, whatever the case may be, that, man, Philadelphia has not looked all that impressive through their first 2 games of this season. They are 2-0, but kind of an ugly win on the road against New England. You open up 16-0, you're kind of rolling, got a pick 6 there, and you end up winning that game by 5, having to stop a Mac Jones-led offense at the very end there in Foxborough. And then 4 days later, in the home opener, a home opener in which, before the first quarter even concludes, in classic Philadelphia fashion, the Boo Birds come. It's Philadelphia, why are we shocked? But anyways, they kind of get off to a slow start, some turnovers a little bit. Jalen Hurts threw a really bad interception over the middle of the field, but they bounce back. Minnesota had some terrible turnovers. We'll get into that aspect of it as we go on through this segment. But Philadelphia ends up winning the game 34-28, in large part led by their incredible, unstoppable run game. The Philadelphia Eagles on the night against Minnesota, albeit not against a great defense, or at least a defense is trying to find itself, but Minnesota ran the ball 48 times for 259 yards, 3 touchdowns. By the way, 5 yards average on the ground, so Minnesota could not stop them all night long. And that's kind of the point I want to get at, is this, I feel like we are, listen, how you react to something is completely based off your expectations. Philadelphia's coming off a season in which they had the number 1 seed. Jalen Hurts finished second in the running, in the voting for MVP behind Patrick Mahomes. And Philadelphia got to the Super Bowl, lost what was a Super Bowl classic to the Kansas City Chiefs, who are the NFL's budding dynasty. And so there's a lot of expectations. Sure, you lose both coordinators. Sure, you lose some players defensively, but you still have the core of this group. You still have Jalen Hurts. You have Devontae Smith. You have A.J. Brown. You have a great offensive line. Defensively, you've got probably still a top 3 front in football. And Nick Sirianni, while I don't think he's exactly Andy Reid or Mike Tomlin, has proven himself to be a solid NFL head coach. The expectations rise. I'm not disappointed in the slightest with Philadelphia, because this is kind of what I expected from them, not just to start the season, but in terms of, and again, you don't want to overreact. Again, only the Vikings and Eagles, only 2 teams in the NFL to this point to play 2 games. But my expectation for Philly is, look, they're really talented. I think they're well coached. They're good situationally. Jalen Hurts is one of the best leaders in the NFL. They've got talent all over the place. They play in a brutal division. They'll finish second in that division. And I think best case scenario that they're the best team in the conference. I think Dallas and San Francisco are neck and neck. I give the Niners the edge for the time being. And it's going to be between kind of Philly and Detroit for that 3rd place spot. We saw Detroit against Kansas City. You guys know I believe in Detroit all offseason long. I have no reason to believe that the Lions, barring injury, knock on wood, that my expectations for Detroit should change in a negative way. And so listen, when you go to a Super Bowl, when you have sustained success, which Philadelphia has, incredibly with multiple head coaches, multiple quarterbacks, it's kind of like an Alabama syndrome where Nick Saban in Alabama's lost a lot of coordinators, and eventually you get to a point now where all of his good coordinators are successful head coaches, and you're having Kirby Smart beating him and Jimbo Fisher beating him, and you got Steve Sarkisian beating him just last weekend in Tuscaloosa. Like, that's part of the process of being a successful team. Now, Philly's not the dynasty that Alabama is, but it's the same sort of energy. And so I think that for Philadelphia, that's going to be the question moving forward, is whether or not they can replace those pieces. We understand Shane Steichen, I think, was a massive loss, given that what he did for Jalen Hurts from a developmental standpoint, and now what he hopes to do in Indianapolis with Anthony Richardson. Again, the way I view it in the NFL is, and if we get to December and Philly's still kind of struggling in the passing game a little bit defensively, they're not great. But as for the sort of towards the defense, didn't we kind of say all of last season, didn't we kind of say all offseason, especially when they were losing defensive pieces, that they kind of feasted off of bad quarterbacks last year? And now, by the way, not just your safeties are gone, now your linebacking core, Nakobe Dean's down, your linebacking core is really thin. And so that's another, sort of deficiency you're trying to deal with. Mac Jones, who I've religiously stated is a backup quarterback in the NFL, played solid. Then you got Kirk Cousins, who I've always said is about the 12th, 13th best quarterback in the NFL. Kirk Cousins had a great night. You say, oh, his numbers are kind of empty. Kirk Cousins wasn't the reason that Minnesota, outside of the one strip sack, Kirk Cousins wasn't the reason that Minnesota just kept turning the ball over and over and over. All the the fumbles on punt returns and on running plays. Like that's not Kirk's fault. Kirk went up and down the field on those guys. By the way, just as far as the scheme is concerned, here's what I couldn't figure out. So Philadelphia takes advantage of the turnovers, overwhelmingly so. They're up 27-7. And Minnesota's just going up and down the field. And it's not because Philly's playing a prevent defense or anything. I mean, it isn't like they're up 20 with 2 minutes to go. And it's just keep everything in front of you. Let's just get this game over with. 20 is listen, this is the same Minnesota Vikings team that came back from a 33-point deficit against the Indianapolis Colts. So it's not like they're a stranger to mind-blowing comebacks. And so for Philadelphia, my question was, why are you singling up Justin Jefferson? That's probably the best receiver in football, at least in my eyes, although Tyreek Hill is putting up a pretty compelling case for that title. But they're not giving I'm saying they're not giving more attention to Justin Jefferson than they are Jordan Addison, the young kid that they drafted out of USC. And I think Jordan Addison could be really good. He's no Justin Jefferson. So defensively, the scheme was what was a little odd. And again, the secondary is a point of concern, a point of weakness. And I said that for Philly coming into the season. But you know what they did? They did what any smart team, any great team does. And I do believe Philadelphia is a great team. I do believe Philadelphia is a contender. I just don't think they're on the level of San Francisco or Dallas. Can they beat them? Sure, they could beat them on a one-game basis, and that's all the playoffs require. I just think today they're the third best, fourth best team in the NFC behind Dallas, San Francisco, Detroit. We're neck and neck with Detroit as we sit here today, but you get the point. What did Philadelphia do? Minnesota makes the comeback. Kirk Cousins is kind of in a rhythm. Justin Jefferson's playing well. He's getting the football, making plays, recovering from what was a terrible fumble in the first half. And what does Philadelphia do? What was the score? It's a 6-point game at this particular point in the game. Yes, 27-21 Philly. Minnesota scores a touchdown. There's 7 minutes, 41 seconds left. So game is far from over. What does Philadelphia do? DeAndre Swift, 7 yards. DeAndre Swift, 4 yards. DeAndre Swift, 3 yards. DeAndre Swift, 2 yards. Then Jalen Hurts completes a pass to A.J. Brown. Big third down conversion, gain of 12. DeAndre Swift, big 43-yard run. DeAndre Swift, 2 yards. DeAndre Swift, 2 more yards, touchdown. They know, and like any great team, what do they have? An identity. Any great team in the NFL, any great team in sports, the one thing they all have in common, they know what they are. They know what they're not. I've said this about Nick Sirianni. I don't think he's some genius head coach. I probably wouldn't put him in the top 15 today. What Nick Sirianni did is what some coaches don't do for pride purposes, but he said, you know what, I'm going to put winning, I'm going to put the organization first and foremost. What did he do exactly? Remember he took the job 2 years ago? Remember he had the bad press conference where it looks like he's reading off a teleprompter. It's kind of clunky. And Philadelphia got off, I think it was to a 3-6 start in 2021. Hurts is kind of looking shaky, and the defense isn't always playing very well. And situationally, they're not stellar. And what did Nick Sirianni do? He said, you know what? I know where I'm good at, what I'm good at, and what I'm not. I'm going to hand the play calling duties to Shane Steichen. Philadelphia took off, made the playoffs. The next year, they made the Super Bowl. Now, Shane Steichen's not in that building anymore, but if there's any team, there's any coach who's self-aware, maybe not self-aware in the sense of, beating his chest on the sideline. He's a little more unconventional in that regard in terms of being an up front and center head coach. We're not used to seeing that, certainly in the National Football League, but in terms of his coaching philosophy, he knows what he is. Philadelphia knows what they are. That's why they've been one of the most successful franchises in the last 2 decades with multiple Super Bowl appearances and a title to show for it. With multiple quarterbacks, multiple head coaches. This organization knows what they are. A power-running football team. Now, does that have its limits? You darn right it does. As we know, the last 4 Super Bowl champions, none of them, I shouldn't say none of them, one of them was ranked in the top 20 in rushing, and that was Kansas City last year. I think it was last year's Chiefs team who were ranked 20th. So barely in the top 20. You don't need to have a great running game to win the Super Bowl. But Philadelphia knows what they're great at, and they have a quarterback who, if they need him to throw, if they need him to make plays with his arm, didn't we just see him in that Super Bowl against Patrick Mahomes? Many argue he outplayed Mahomes, and Mahomes played amazing, played perfect in the second half of that game and won the MVP of that football game. Philadelphia knows what they are and what they're not, and what they are is a very talented football team, a very physical team up front on both sides of the ball, and they're going to be a handful. So I don't think it's a situation where with the skies, again, they are 2-0. And at the end of the day, the NFL is not the AP poll in college football. You don't need style points. You don't need to, if you're playing a bad team, or I shouldn't say necessarily a bad team, but like a D2 team, you don't need to beat them by 50. You just need to win. Just need to win. Doesn't matter about style points. Doesn't matter about strength of schedule or record, all that. Just need to win. I mean, the Minnesota Vikings won last year, won 13 games with a negative point differential. It obviously cost them the playoffs. It didn't cost them in getting to the playoffs. Philadelphia will be fine. Philadelphia is well coached. Philadelphia has an excellent roster. By the way, they get 10 days off. They get to go to Tampa Bay. 11 days off, and they get to go play Tampa Bay on the road in week 3. They'll beat Tampa Bay. Eagles are going to be fine. I have no concerns whatsoever. Other than the fact they're not great against competent quarterbacks. Even Mac Jones, who I don't even know is quite that, went up and down the field on them in the second half. And Kirk Cousins looked awesome in the second half against this Eagles defense. That's my only point of concern. But in terms of what they know they are or aren't, they're as secure as any team in football. So I'm not worried about Philadelphia moving forward. They are kind of what I said they were. They're a top 3-4 team in the NFC. They're not going to be quite as good as they were a year ago, but they'll absolutely be in the mix once the playoffs roll around, once we get to January, obviously, if their key pieces are able to stay healthy. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.